What's up, guys? Today I'm with my friend Wright, who has been a licensed clinical social worker for over 20 years. I'm going to ask him questions about Gen Z, mental health, loneliness, and masculinity. Wright, what are some stark differences you realize with Gen Z compared to previous generations, especially when they struggle with their mental health?
That's a good question, and it is sort of a unique, and I think every generation has their own unique mental health needs. You know, you grow up in a different world, and the world sort of shapes you, and you know, some generations grow up with some needs being met better than others. Gen Z has struggled through, I think first and foremost, and probably hardest to describe, is the post 9/11 world, which is very different than the world I grew up in. I grew up in a world without war, really. You know,
Okay.
we had military and you'd hear about things overseas, but a world right now, it's hard to envision that world
Gotcha.
that I grew up with. And the other thing, of course, is COVID.
Yeah.
You know, and social isolation has become a big problem for a lot of people in Gen Z. And it was difficult for everybody, but I think when you are coming up during a time in your life when you know, your friends are supposed to be the most important people in your life, and you spend a lot of time with them. You know, I know my niece, she is now 18, right? So she was 13 when the pandemic started. She's turning 18 next week, actually. She and her friends had a funny thing. There were all these, you know, websites and chat rooms, and they would all be on the same chat on their phones in their room talking to each other, you know. But I don't know that that really suffices for really hanging out at each other's houses.
Yeah. Could you clarify on what you meant by like the post 9/11 war, especially with Gen Z? Feels like a lot of us struggle with security and instability. It seems as if there isn't really a place for us, and we haven't had like a grounding or a foundation to allow us to like launch off from our parents and start our own lives.
And that's sort of the, you know, unfortunately, sort of the stereotype I think that a lot of people have, that, you know, Gen Zers don't, you know, aren't motivated, don't want to leave their parents' house. And actually, in my work with young adults, I actually don't think that's it at all. I think, as you mentioned, you know, it's like, how do you find your place, right? You know, particularly in the last 10 years, the instability, or I'll say at least the perception of people's stability in the economy and the world around them. You know, they hear from their parents, which I think has been really unfortunate, that, you know, parents today don't do enough to kind of reassure their kids.
Yeah.
You know, the parents are freaking out.
Yeah.
And I think that that has kind of leaked over into their kids' worlds, because you know, kids, you know, teenagers, children get their sense of security from their parents. You know, at any age, even as teenagers. You see your parents freaking out about the world, complaining about this and that, in the sense that it, not just complaining, but, you know, that the sky is falling. Kids see that's the approach that they have about the world, you know, and so I think the biggest struggle is to know that despite everything that you've been raised to believe,
Yeah.
actually the world is going to be okay.
Okay.
And we're going to get through all of whatever you see out there that's bad. We're going to get through it.
Gotcha.
And the world has actually been through tougher times. And I think that that's sort of the lesson that I took away from my parents,
Yeah.
who you know, grew up in the Depression, or in the wake of the Depression. You know, my grandparents, you know, lived through the Depression,
Yeah.
and they were fine. They lived through, you know, 2 world wars and Korea and Vietnam, and they were fine.
So would you say the messaging has changed towards like Gen Z? Because we grow up in an environment where it's like every day the sky is falling, something
Yes.
is terrible. And naturally when you're growing in early adolescence to late adolescence, you're still just trying to find your own identity. And anxiety and mental health statistics for Gen Z is terrible right now.
Yeah.
It's like, I think 62% of people in my cohort report really bad days, and they get diagnosed with social anxiety and depression.
Yep.
So what advice would you have for us?
Stay offline.
Okay. Okay.
You know, you know, and that's hard. That's tough advice to hand out, and it's tough advice to adhere to. Gen Z, every generation more than the one prior, has grown up in a digital world.
Yeah.
You know, and so we're all addicted to our phones. You know, where's my phone? It's in my left pocket right now.
Yeah.
You know, is my ringer off? Yes.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm very aware of my phone. You know, we all are. It's like, where's your phone? What's its status? Are you getting ready? Are you listening for a ding? I remember when pagers first came out. Or are we listening to the rain? Oh, that's great.
Yeah, put down.
Pagers first came out. I got a pager because I had a job that I felt like needed to be able to get in touch with me. And they did kind of. But I remember I always had it on vibrate, and I remember how jolting it was. And now I look back on it like, you know, it was another sort of stimulus in the environment, you know, and going online is like my pager on steroids, because go online and your brain is flooded with content, more content than our brains are physiologically capable of absorbing. Even if it's good content, it's too much for our brains to absorb. And anxiety is a function of an overload to the central nervous system.
Gotcha.
It's when you get stress, signs of anxiety come about when your central nervous system is overloaded. Now, of course, when it's overloaded with a fear of safety, it's even more so. But just clicking on things, looking at things, having lights flashing in your eyes, you know, different colors, the scrolling, one video, you know, 30-second clip after a 30-second clip, it's too much. And what I think we really all need to do is log out for a certain number of hours a day, get outside, go for a walk, be in touch with nature, and much or more than anyone else, spend time in the presence of other people.
Yeah.
You know, which I know is tough. You're alone, and we're going to talk about that, but studies actually show that people have lower levels of cortisol in their bloodstream, which is the biggest stress hormone. You have lower levels of cortisol in your bloodstream the more time you spend in the presence of other people.
Gotcha. So if you feel kind of overwhelmed and anxious and crazy, it's kind of due to the environment of the stimuli of the phone and stuff. So it's normal to feel overwhelmed due to how our phone is integrated into our lives.
Right. And it seems like a good escape, but it's actually, you know, you get that hit of dopamine, but as soon as you get away from the phone, the stress comes back. You're best to just cope without the phone, detox.
Yeah. Because I would say your generation, when you guys grew up in an environment where you guys didn't have phones, and that was integrated into your life later on, because you had the before and after the iPhone. But for us, it was just, it started with an iPhone.
Yeah.
And we just grew up with
Age 8.
Yeah.
Probably for a lot of kids.
So we never had a time where we didn't really have that technology. So it's a stark contrast to putting it down. We have to be active about that intention of putting it down, and as well as moving into in real life social interactions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So young men struggle with loneliness more now than ever. It feels as if there isn't like a safe space for them or a belonging to society.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for men who struggle with their loneliness?
Yeah, and it seems sort of obvious, but like find people, you know, and be deliberate about it. You know, work used to be a place where when you got into your 20s, early 20s, right, and you got your first job out of school, whether it was college or high school, right, you developed a lot of friendships through people in a workplace. And now there's so much work is online. I actually think working online is great, but it perpetuates feeling of loneliness. You know, if you have a job where you can go into the office, get up and go into the office, be around people. The more people that go into the office, the more social it is. It will seem like you're losing a convenience, and you are. And look, I work out of my house right now, and frankly, it's driving me crazy. I'm like dying to get an office right now because I need to be around other people. We all do. We're social animals, you know, and so if you can get that through job, that's great. Find, you know, meetup groups online and encourage people in your cohort to get out and be amongst each other. I think everyone really recognizes the benefits of being around other people. I don't think anybody really argues that. I think we don't challenge ourselves enough to take what seems like a more difficult route. You know, we have to challenge ourselves to get out of what we feel like is our comfort zone, but our comfort zone is really what's perpetuating the feeling of loneliness.
I see.
We got to challenge ourselves.
So a lot of people in my cohort struggle with social anxiety. So do you have to kind of push past that barrier and realize that it's going to be painful. It's going to be uncomfortable for a while. But eventually it will get better over time.
Absolutely. And it'll get better. It can actually get better pretty quickly. I've worked with a lot of folks with social anxiety. And, you know, my biggest piece of advice to them is like, you know, when you get in a group of people, ask people about themselves, get people to talk about themselves. There's nothing like being able to just listen to somebody to make yourself feel like you're being social.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to come up with stuff to talk about. You have to just come up with questions to ask. You know,
Gotcha.
and at every party, there's at least one person who will spend the whole night talking about themselves,
Yeah.
and you'll be dying to get away from them.
Yeah.
But you know, yeah, push past it and understand that anxiety is, yes, there's a lot that gets triggered by the environment, but also it's a physiological response. It's something that's going on in your body. It's elevated levels of stress hormones. It's, you know, parts of your brain taking over other parts of your brain, you know, that prevents us or makes it hard for us to access parts of our brain that help us to be creative, help us to think through logically. When you're feeling anxious, finding good distractions from the anxiety is a helpful way to get away from that. And being around people is the best distraction of all.
Yeah. So getting out of your own head in your own way and allow people to fill that void.
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
You good? Is everything looking good right now? Sweet. Okay.
How you doing, Colleen?
Oh, I'm good.
Okay. It's kind of peaceful.
I'm just here on my phone.
Yeah. It's very peaceful to just hang out here, right?
It is.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to separate this into two different videos because I don't want to make it 30 minutes long. But the second part is going to talk about the masculinity and what toxic masculinity is, and as well as Wright's thoughts on it. If you guys want to find Wright, you guys can find him at turnthepage.life, which I'll add in the description below. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next week.